pattern do you see most often in your Asian American clients, particularly around perfectionism, people pleasing, or fear of disappointing their parents or their communities?
Yeah, I think like there's a very strong underlying pattern of perfectionism. Because if we think about perfectionism, it's really just not disappoint our parents and just get it right and like get it right the first time. It kind of comes in with like that achievement that we want, right? And how valued it is. Overachievement and achievement is so valued in our culture that it turns into perfectionism. It turns into, oh, I don't want to do something unless I get it right, or like I can't do this unless it's like perfect. And that's challenging because then it becomes into this almost like fear of like, if this isn't right and I'm not making this 100% right decision, I can't do it.
This is the Asian Rebel Club podcast, a space for the ones who grew up chasing approval and are now learning how to be free. I am Crystal Ren, entrepreneur, creative, and recovering achievement addict. Each week, we dive into honest conversations with Asian rebels, rewriting what success, identity, and freedom really mean. If you're ready to live your story, not somebody else, welcome home. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of perfectionism. There's a lot of patterns of discovery too, like late self-discovery. I
Right.
get a lot of clients and I work with a lot of people who, in their late and early 30s are still learning about themselves. They're still learning
Yeah.
about what they
Yeah.
what their interests are and what their hobbies are, and they're learning about who they are outside of their work and or their school, like outside of academia.
So first of all, to the perfectionism, I felt like it's also a consequences of being a people pleaser, right? The reason why these people feel like they need to be perfect, I think part of it is because they don't want to disappoint, people around them. They want to uphold the image. Also, part of it, then once you start to do it and you do it for decades, it becomes a part of your identity. So you feel like if you're not perfect, then you don't know who you are, right? So I think that all these things becomes like very rigid, and it can make you a very rigid person, right? Because if you don't want to do things because you don't know how to do it or too much risk, then you become this like one straight line goes one direction, right? And I'm not sure what's in the Asian culture that almost like nobody ever questioned that is perhaps not good to be that way, right? Because like, for example, my parents, both of them had the same job. They work for the same organization their entire life. And that straight line is actually a good thing, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, think about it. Like, okay, if I know I'm in a straight line, I'm good. I'm safe, right? It's
Yeah.
predictable. I know I'm cruising in this straight line. If I'm going
Yeah.
all over the place, how scary is this, right? How
Yeah.
unstable is this, right? And so this predictability and this like straight line that sometimes we go on, it's safe and it feels, again, it's the safety and the security and the stability of it.
Right. Right. And also I think this is something that I've noticed, and I think that people also talk about how sometimes Asian, especially Chinese, is like we don't have hobbies, right? Like your hobby is like making money and talking about real estate, you know? Then so you go to work, you go make some money, you come back, you think about how to invest the money. Like
Yeah.
what else do you do? Like, maybe you have a hobby and that is to play the piano. I mean, come on. I mean, I'm not saying like, I play the piano too, but it's just that like, who are you, right? Because you can't always be the same thing. That's not possible. So why is that the case?
Yeah. And I don't know, I think that goes back to, like when, again, it's like that it's trying to set us up for success, right? I I think I'm trying to remember because at some point my parents tried to get me into piano too, but I wasn't like, I want to do piano. It was like, I don't think I want to do this, but okay. And so it's really like I think our family's trying to set us up for success and set us up to achieve, right? Because it is, again, stable, safe, and secure. But, but, and we focus so much on that achievement and we focus so much on that security and the stability that we forget sometimes that we're like humans that should also have outside interests. Because if I don't have
Yeah.
friends and I don't have hobbies and maybe it's even hard, I see a lot like people that have challenges or struggle with like making friends or communicating, and and we're in our late 20s and 30s, and it's hard to make friends because like I've been like in this academic bubble, or I've been in this like bubble of just work, and all I've focused on is like making money and like having a stable
Yeah.
career that I don't
Straight A
have.
students.
Yeah, and I don't have anything, I don't know anything else, right? And I don't have any other hobbies because maybe we were never allowed to we weren't given the freedom to do all of that. And we felt
Yeah.
so much pressure to just focus on the most important thing, which is like
Right. Right.
making money, right? Then it's like, then I don't know who I am outside of that.
Yeah, it's like after all, making friends, how much more money can you make when you make more friends, right? But I think that, gosh, like when I was in my early 20s and I was such a nerd, and I remember studying for a CFA and I finished 3 levels in 2 years. And basically, sometimes I would not see a single person for 3, 4 days straight because I was just in that study mode. And my friend told me, it's like, oh, you don't need any friends now because they're always going to come back. Like, you can just focus on whatever you want to do right now, and you can focus on friendship later. But what I've noticed is that it doesn't work in that way.
No.
You don't have high quality friendship if you don't invest in it. Sure, you can have like some party friends here and there, but that is a skill set, right? Communicating, how to relate to other people, how to relate to yourself. All these things take time and practice. And you can't just be like, oh, this, stage of my life, I'm going to focus on study. And then next stage, I'm going to focus on work. And the next stage, I'm going to focus on kids. And I die. Like, you, you have a emotion, your body, like all these things gotta be taken care of. Otherwise, you're not gonna exist to do all these things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of, a common message that we get is like, oh, you'll have time. You'll have time to make friends. You don't have to worry about that now. You'll have time to like, you want to do art, you do art when you are making enough money and you don't have to worry about it. Right. You want to go to this concert, you do that when you're making enough money then. Right. That's a lot of the times the main message that we get is like, you don't worry about all those things. You worry about getting a job and like having a stable life first. And then all those things come later. But then you're like 30 years old or you're like 35 years old and you don't have any friends and you don't know how to make friends. And the older that we
Huh.
get, the harder it is
Sure it
to make
is.
friends. Yeah.
Yeah,
The harder it is
100%.
to meet people.
And also, I think that if you're not even connected with yourself, right? Like your emotions, and all you're thinking about is like money, career, kids, like all these things, practical things, the depth of friendship will also be very shallow, right? Just because if you're not able to be vulnerable with other people, like what kind of friends will they be? Like maybe they will be practical friends, but it's not going to be the same kind of experience.
Yeah. And that goes for, I'm smiling because that also goes for dating. And like people that
Yeah.
have the most trouble dating or finding a partner are usually people that are very career oriented, or that like their whole world is like their career. But now you don't know about your feelings, you don't have any hobbies. So it's hard to meet people. And then when you do find someone, you don't have the skills to manage this relationship. You don't have the
Yeah.
skills, you don't have the emotional intelligence to keep up this relationship and to make someone feel like heard and seen and understood either.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just wanted to jump in on that. Growing up in China, it's so funny. We always joke amongst my friends that before you turn 18, all you need to do as a kid, a student, a teenager was to just study. So you're not even supposed to talk to guys. You're not supposed to talk to opposite sex. You're not supposed to wear anything that's too sexy. You're not supposed to put on makeup. The first time I put on makeup was when I was 19 years old. I was a nerd before. After you're 18 years old, you went to college, and boom, like all of a sudden, a switch turned on. You're supposed to meet a guy and just get married. That's the narrative that a Chinese, a parent will tell you. And it's so, to a kid, like mind blowing, right? Because they're just thinking like, oh my gosh, like, before I'm stressed about this, now I'm stressed about this. Like before I was judged of this, now like you're judging me, because I'm single or not. And I think that that contributes to a lot of divorce rates these days in China as well. And it's because I think again, like you said, right? It takes a lot of art and a lot of practice to understand yourself and managing relationships
Mhm.
and the depths of it to
Mhm.
connect with other people, the EQ part of things that is so important, it's intangible, but it will make or break your marriage, the education of your kid and essentially your whole life, right? And that's such an overarching thing that people just for some reason don't see it, especially in this culture.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I run into most often, like the conflict is that when you don't know about your own feelings and you don't have insight into your own feelings, then we don't know how to manage our feelings and we don't know how to like process our feelings. And when we don't know how to manage our feelings and process our feelings, it affects our partner.
Yeah,
And also if we don't know how we're feeling, maybe we also don't have the skills to know how our partner is feeling. And now we don't know how to connect with them and support them and hear them and understand them. And
right.
that communication and that like emotional support is very important in a relationship and in a long-term marriage too.
Yeah, yeah. 100%. So now I want to talk to you about relationships because I think that's also a unique topic in the Asian community. How does cultural conditioning and fear of judgment from the community trap people, in your opinion, especially Asians, in relationships that they don't want to be
Yeah, I think that, and maybe I think from my perspective and my experience and the people that I work with, we see this most often in parents. And I'll hear this
in?
more often in like, well, my parents are like this and this. And what I hear most often is that with parents that have like conflict, there's usually some like resentment in the parents for like enduring and like sacrificing whatever they're, how they're feeling and what they want out of the relationship. There's usually like one person in the relationship, and it could be mom and it could be dad, that is like feeling that they're sacrificing like their happiness and like what they
Hmm.
wanted for this relationship and for our family.
Right.
And they're having to like endure and they're having to just put up with it. And they're enduring and like putting up with this for years and years and years because family comes first, community comes first. And I think there's a strong idea of like, well, when we make a commitment, like it means like we're making a commitment no matter
Like
what.
forever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
forever. And that means like even if you like suck as a person or like you're angry all the time or you like can't manage your own feelings or like whatever it is, no matter what, we're sticking with this. We're enduring. And love and like relationship and that commitment, it means sacrifice.
Yeah, yeah. Why is that a problem? Because again, our parents did it, right? Like the last few generations did it. So how come now is a problem that we need to bring up and address?
I think that I think it's always been a problem, but I think that we're more open to like learning about this problem than maybe
Yeah.
generations before. And we're more open to like kind of, divorce I think is quite common now. You hit your 40s and you're having like divorce parties already. Like, it can be common.
Yeah.
But I think that why this is can be like it's not helpful or why it can hurt your kids to see a relationship like that. What I often see and usually the people that I work with who are like single and like they're dating and they're getting, they're trying to meet a long-term partner, what they think is like these people have all these red flags and they're, they don't listen to my feelings and we just do what they want to do and maybe they put us down, right? But I
Mhm.
really like them and I want to be committed. So I'm going to put up with this and I'm just going to
Mm.
endure and I'm going to sacrifice and these things. If I want to be in a committed relationship and I want marriage, then I have to put up with things that I'm not going to like. And
Right.
that's where it gets sometimes a little murky and a little scary. Like why, if I'm totally unhappy with these list of things, I don't how long can you sustain that for?
Exactly.
Right? Like those things,
Yeah,
I think some of those things are really important. Does the person respect you? Do they support you? Are they always putting you down? Are they don't care what you want and it's always
it's
about them and
basic.
what they want? Like
Yeah,
what kind of relationship is that? But because we saw our parents do that and they endure and they sacrifice and that's what commitment means, then I can put up with it too. And that's what that is.
right.
And you learn that that's what that means in a relationship.
Right. And how about, for example, like parents sacrifice like 10, 15 years into it, they realize that there's no romance, like everything is kind of just pragmatic, right? The life goes and you're not necessarily a couple anymore, but you stay together for the kids. I think that that's also very common in the Asian community where everything is about the kids. And you always put your happiness behind the kids, right? Do you think that is a good practice? Is because it's just something where I felt like it's a little bit gray, right? So for example, if the relationship is very abusive, and obviously this person needs to leave, right, for their own mental health, that becomes almost easier to make a decision on. But say if a relationship is not good and you perhaps won't stay together if there's no kids, but it's not bad, but you have kids, so it's like, and you prioritize that, right? So how can a person make a decision in these kind of situations?
Yeah, it's kind of the same. And this is very common. I see this a lot in families where it's gray because it's not like any of the extremes where your safety is a concern. It's more like oh, maybe we're just like roommates, or it's turned into like just, the responsibility of being parents. But maybe us as a couple, we don't really have a connection. And now we're just operating as parents and we have this role to keep the family together so we can so our kids can have both parents and it's easier to take care of them together, right, when we're co-parenting.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times like this gray area, it really kind of goes back to the same idea that we were talking about before, is like how long, if you think you can sustain this and you can like shove it down and it works for you, then some people can stay in a relationship like that, I think, until they age.
Yeah.
And like even if their kids are adults, like I work with a lot of people where their parents, they're adults, but their parents are kind of just roommates and they've just been like roommates for a long time. Or even
Right.
they're separated, but they still live together in the same home and they still operate the same. And it's like, okay, but all the kids are out of the house, but that's just how they operate, right? And so it's the same thing of like, how long do you think you can sustain this like repression of feelings, or like this like resentment that's building up, or unhappiness that's building up? How long can you sustain that for? And for some people, I think when people decide to leave in a marriage or in a relationship, it's because they ask themselves, can I go on like this for years? And a lot of the times when they decide to leave, the answer is no. They can't sustain this any longer. It's stacked up too much for them, and it's hard to
Yeah.
shove it down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that sometimes it's easier to have kids as a filter or, a buffer in the middle, right? Like when you are focused on childcare, you're focused on discussing anything about the kid, it's almost like you can shovel it down because something else is more important. But again, how sustainable is that, right, in the long term? And so how would you advise people to deal with the inner conflict? Because it's really about the conflict between the personal truth and also the perceived duty in these situations.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And it can go on, that like discussion of the conflict. It can last like a really long time for a lot of people because it's so back and forth. And because sometimes it's so gray. It's not bad, but it's not good. And so it's just kind of like, okay, like, it's such in a gray area. And for some people, it can take a while to kind of go back and forth. What I would say is it's just kind of going back to asking yourself, is this sustainable?
Right. And how can somebody begin to build that emotional strength to leave, especially when they're afraid of being ungrateful, selfish, or maybe too late? They're like 60 years old. They just want to, like, they honestly at the time just wanted to have a roommate, or maybe that's what they think, right? A roommate that they can rely on for, the retirement life.
Yeah. A common theme amongst like even my clients that are maybe late phase, early phase to my clients that have been in their 60s, a common theme is in terms of like an emotional kind of challenge is that fear. And it goes back into the fear of like not knowing what's next and that self-doubt, like that we are not believing in ourselves that we can do it or we
Yeah.
have the strength to be able to do what we need to do to get ourselves out of this situation. And so a lot of the work in the beginning is really building up our self-esteem and our belief in ourselves of like, okay, like actually I've done through a lot. I've been through a lot, right? And I've done a lot and I do have the strength to make the decisions that I want to make. I can do
Yeah.
this, right? Is like kind of a really strong belief that we need to have. And sometimes it's not something that we need to have right away. It's not something that we need to build right away, but sometimes that belief in yourself builds as you go with like the steps
Every
that you
decision.
take.
Yeah. Yeah. Is to choose yourself with every single decision you make, no matter how small it is. It started to accumulate and you start to have the confidence in the long term.
Yes. And a lot of the times, what I'll even say is the fact that you're in therapy now means you're choosing you
Yeah.
first. You're
Yeah.
choosing to take care of yourself. You're choosing to prioritize yourself. And that in itself is a huge step to take.
Right, right, for sure. Because some people, and especially I think maybe for a lot of guys, I'm just generalizing here. They don't necessarily want to go to therapy because they don't want to be perceived as weak or too emotional because that's just not like the male stereotype, right? And it's really kind of changing their narratives they have about therapy in general, so that they can get the help they need before it's too late.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say, yeah, that's definitely kind of a spot on stereotype. But also I think even if we're thinking about people like in their 50s and 60s,
Yeah.
they didn't really grow up with mental health or therapy either. And so there's a lot of like kind of unknown and even sometimes like, their first time in therapy is their first time and the reason why they're really seeking it out is because they're unhappy in like their marriages, right? But there's like
Right.
that fear of like the unknown of like we don't know what therapy is like and we didn't grow up with this either.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask you that question because my parents are exactly like that. I told them like 50 times because they use me as a emotional support, right? Like, and I think that's very common amongst Asian, especially Asian girls. Almost we become like the emotional crutch of our parents, and they just dump anything. There's no boundary, right? They tell me about the marital problems, like family problems, this problem, that problem, and you're supposed to listen and be supportive as if I don't have my own feelings. But when I tell them to go to therapy, they're like, yeah, I'll do it. And then they never do it. It's like kind of like a lost cause, but I do think it's very necessary because there's just things I cannot solve for, my parents, and a lot of people probably have the same issues too. So if you were to persuade these parents or help out these kids who's got these parents, what will you say to them to perhaps lessen their fear or maybe have them to be more optimistic and confident about therapy?
Yeah, there's a couple of my go-to things is like if we're kids and we're trying to, get our parents into therapy, a lot of the times what I recommend is kind of helping them one like normalize it and talk about it. If you're in therapy, like hype it up, right? Hype it up for them so that they're hearing all the good things about therapy. But also sometimes and what I find with a lot of like parents or just people from the older generation is that sometimes it's helpful to help them pick a therapist, like do it with them, like walk it through and make it doable
Mm.
for them and normalize it for them so that it feels a little like more comfortable and a little safe. Sometimes I'll even have like, even if it's like for family therapy, what I'll do is I'll have the kids kind of introduce me to their parents first. Usually what happens, I think, with older generation is they like to see another Asian therapist. It's
Yeah.
comfortable, it's safe,
Yeah.
and it's like if you look like me and like my Chinese isn't great, but I'll try my best. And they see that I'm trying, like it just feels more comfortable and it feels
Right.
more like safe. And so that's one way to do it with our parents. Another way is really just being able to, again, like the more we talk about something, the more normal it becomes. That the older generation, they didn't grow up with mental health. They didn't grow up with therapists. My parents like barely even could figure out. I think we had to Google how to say therapist in Chinese, right? In Mandarin. And so it's just not a thing. But the more that we talk about it, even if I think even in more like Asian communities and Asian American communities, the more we talk about mental health, the more normal it becomes. And then the less scary it becomes. It's only scary because we don't really like grow up hearing about it and we don't grow up talking about it. It's very like hush hush and like kind of a
Mm,
secret, or like,
hmm.
ooh, that means like you're really in trouble, or that means
You're
like
like
you're
you're
crazy.
mentally ill. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So it's like, oh, we don't want to go to therapy because I'm not mentally ill or I'm not crazy, so I don't need therapy. So it's really just about like really normalizing it and also helping them find someone that they'll feel comfortable with. Maybe it's someone
Right.
older, and maybe it's someone, if you're Chinese, if you're Korean, if you're Japanese, like whatever culture they feel more comfortable with, finding someone that also can relate. There's a lot of therapists that do speak Mandarin or Cantonese
Hmm.
or Vietnamese or whatever like their primary language is. Even being able to find an option like that, it can make like the world of a difference for them.
Right, right, right. And it's so funny to think about it now. I told you that my dad told me to not study psychology when I got into psychology major in the States when I was 17 years old, because he was like, English is not your first language. How could you ever fix white people's problems? But I think that, it's ironic because there's more like 10 million Asian Americans or something like in the States, right? It's a huge community. And having a second language, or whoever looks like you can speak your language, can relate to your cultural context, that is huge. It gives people so much mental safety when they're discussing all these topics with another person.
Hmm. I'll find that like even say like working with people where say Mandarin or like Cantonese is their first language, just like the fact that I look like them or that and I look like a part of their community, it gets me through the door right away. Like all
Yeah.
walls drop, the comfortability level like increases tenfold. It really is. And I think that's why it's so important, and why I think in my work that I do, I really emphasize like Asian representation, but also Asian representation in mental health and in the
Yeah.
community, and really normalizing it for them, because it does feel more like safe and it feels more familiar. It's something that we don't know about. It seems a little less scary because you're also Asian or you're also Chinese, and like, yeah, you're a therapist, right? Oh, you studied
Yeah.
psychology, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And what drew you to become a therapist and specifically to serve the Asian American community?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm like laughing a lot inside because I don't think I told you this, but I went into college like pre-med.
You're the first case you dealt with.
Like I went in and I even did like this, like I worked in a doctor's office for like a year in high school too, because I was like on the pre-med route. Like I wanted to be like a pediatrician. But the thing is like
Overachiever at 15 years old.
so I was doing all of that too. And, I was volunteering and things like that. But I knew that I was not good at like the sciences and I was not good at math. And I've always struggled with math. And that was like a big kind of conversation in my family with my parents of like, ooh, like I'm actually trying my best. Like, please believe that I'm actually trying my best. It's just like not working up here. And like throughout college, it was kind of like I think in the first like couple years when you're doing all your kind of prereqs, like I had to take like pre-calc and I had to take stats again, and I had to take these biology classes, and I was going to my classes 3 days a week, and then on top of that I was going to tutoring like every single day. And so I was like doing double the work, and it was like really awful because I was studying. It's not like I was like not studying. I was going to tutoring, I was going to lectures, and I was going to like another guy's lecture. So I was going to like double lectures to
You're
get
being a
like
good Asian. You're really trying.
yeah. And then, and I was still barely passing the class. I was passing with like a C, and maybe I got lucky with like C minuses or C's like every once in a while. And then one day I went to like the counselor, and my counselor was like, I don't think you can get into like med school. And I was like, oh shit.
No.
Yeah. Oh no. Like, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna say to like my parents? It's like the same idea, right? Like, oh my gosh, like I've even did it in high school. Like I was like in my head taking pre-med classes in high school. And then
That was
but
what,
I
like
was
6 years of work?
yeah, but the funny thing is I was a psychology major. Like I could
Yeah.
only get in with a psych. I don't think I could have gotten into college with any other like science or math major because I like just didn't have the background in it and I sucked at it. So I got in with like a psychology major. I had to explain to my parents what psychology was. I took up like this, I worked in a lab on campus and I had to explain to my parents what the lab was about, what like Asian psychology, it was like an Asian studies and psychology lab. I had to
That was
explain to
not what
them.
they imagined a pre-mat major was.
No. And so for me, I really had to pivot really hard. I had like this like really big meltdown. I had to have like this epiphany moment of like, this is not in the cards for me, I think. And I need to figure out ASAP what I'm going to do. It felt very critical, high stakes.
Yeah.
And so what had happened is I just started like volunteering in a shelter for victims of like domestic violence and sexual abuse, which I also had to explain to my parents. And my parents were very worried about me. They were very
Yeah.
worried about my
Worry about your
safety.
safety. Yeah, for sure. And that's how
Yeah.
Asian parents think.
And I think for me, I just got lucky. Like I tried these different things. I interned, I put myself out there, I interned and volunteered, and I kind of just I kind of hopped along. I think I had to really for me because I couldn't even pass like my classes barely. So I was like, I don't think I can get into med school. My counselor is right. So I really needed to kind of listen to my gut and figure out, okay, like what am I actually interested in and what am I really good at? Like it's not
Hmm.
what about like what other people expect of me. I don't My parents didn't even like really pressure me that much. It was like, okay, like if you think this is good, like we trust you, like just do it, I guess, right? And they had to trust me because they didn't know anything about psychology. And so I had to really learn to trust myself and like lean on what okay, like if I didn't like this, then let me try this. And well, I like this, so let me try this other thing and try to kind of really like fine tune what I liked. And it just happened to be like in the counseling realm. And I had like some experiences here and there with like counseling and all of that. And so I think I always tell people that I work with, like I got really lucky because I felt like for me, it was, I really had this moment of, oh, I need to really trust myself and I need to figure it out or else I'm going to be really lost. And
Hmm.
so I really had to force myself to kind of figure out what I was good at because this
Right.
possibility was just like felt like very out of reach or not even a possibility anymore.
Right. And I think it's because you were so committed to it, right? I think now it's like a blessing in disguise, but that time must have been like super stressful because you were 100% in something and then being told that you have 0% chance to get there. So it's almost like you're alive.
There was a
It's
lot
not
of
just,
crying. Yeah.
yeah, it's existential. Like it's not even just like, oh, it's just a career, today you can do this, tomorrow can do that. But it's just like your whole life, you plan for this moment, and that moment is not gonna arrive at
Yeah.
all. So now
Yeah.
you gotta figure out the kind of person you want to be. That's very, very scary for sure.
Yeah, it was really scary. I like shut myself up in my room for like I think like 2 days. Like I was sad. I was really sad. I was like crying. I think I ended up like painting it like just to try to make myself feel better. But it was like really and when my clients tell me like it feels like so scary and so high stakes, because it really does
It
truly
is.
feel like that. And I've been there and I understand how high stakes it can feel.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think I add a lot of depth to what you were talking about before, right? Because it's a lived experience. And I think that, having that cultural understanding underneath, really help because you say if you like, I think a lot of times in psychology, it's not about the textbook, right? It's not like, medicine where this pill treats this disease or something like
Mhm.
that. And it's really about like the inner experience of a person. So the trust is built on that, right? So if they think that you have the shared experience, they will 100% trust you because you've gone through that journey and you've gone through the other end. So whatever you say, they know it will land. So it's not just about the degree itself. It's a lot about life as well. And I think that for Asians, it almost feels like we are in survival mode much longer than Again, this is like stereotype, but I want to say like Westerners because the stereotype is that they are allowed to be who they are from a much younger age, and a lot of times, and for us, it's like as we are talking about stability and paying bills and being like a good husband or wife providers, like taking care of the kids. All these things come first, right? Like when it come down to you want to self actualize and maybe not even that like high up, but just like, I want to be happy for myself. It's oftentimes much a bigger of a struggle and then maybe later in life as well.
Yeah, our cultures are just so our cultures at the end of the day, they're different. One is very individualistic and one is more
Yeah.
collectivistic. One is more about the community, the parents, and like our family sacrifices and what we're doing to give back and how we're representing our family and how we're representing our community. And so it
Yeah.
very much is about like the greater whole. And so when we have that to balance out, on top of maybe even not like being we don't always have the privilege to learn about our feelings. It's a privilege to learn about our feelings. It's a privilege to not have to worry about stability and money and finances, right? And so a lot of times I think for the Asian community, we have not had that privilege to have all those.
Right.
We have had to put our community first or put stability and security first. And so when we
Right.
don't grow up with that, then it does take us longer to it forces us to be, I guess, in survival mode longer. And that culture is rooted in that survival mode.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what therapy and what all of everything that we've been talking about today is very much how do we how do we respect and like learn about our culture, but also how do we undo a little bit of that like fear and a little bit of that like kind of survival mindset, right? How do we get
Yeah.
out of that survival mindset if we don't have to be in that survival mindset? A lot of
Exactly.
first
Exactly.
generation, second generation Asian Americans, they don't have to be in that survival mindset. But because
No,
we
they
like
don't.
grow up in that culture, then we're in that survival mindset up until our adulthood.
Yeah, for sure. This is what I noticed when I moved from China to California and also Canada, where like I just felt like, oh my gosh, like Asian Americans and Canadians, especially in, I guess, more of a minority environment. Because I think that sometimes in, San Francisco, New York, these places, you still see a lot of Asians, right? But then if you're in like smaller town, you don't see a lot of other people look like you. And it seems like they're really, really in that like limited mindset where it's all about, like even if you're going to choose your career as like pharmacist, like maybe doctor or something like that. And then you marry somebody in your community, you go to church and it's like a Chinese church, like, so it's very much that, right? And then I just felt like I didn't have that in China in terms of like just for myself because I was always taught like 'cause there's so many different kind of people in China and they're all doing different things, right? Like police and you can be a garbage man if you want to be and they're all Asian. So I never felt like there was a limitation in terms of what I can be. But I definitely feel like in North America where if you're a minority and you don't see a lot of role models, like your world is this small versus this big. And it's almost like even though a lot of people, Asians in North America, like maybe materially speaking, they're much more wealthy than the average Chinese, the way they perceive their options is a lot more limited than the Chinese like me, right? And I just couldn't fathom. I was like, how could that be the case? But like it's the cultural and societal structure and something that so deeply ingrained in you, even if you don't need to do this anymore, you don't need to survive anymore, as you said, like they still think that they need to do it because they don't really see any other way.
And this is why I do consider like the Asian culture to be different from Asian American culture. I think there
For
is
sure.
Asian American culture and when you grow up Asian American, there very much is kind of these different nuances that you grow up and things that you kind of have to balance with that comes with both cultures. That is different
Yeah.
if you are growing
Yeah.
up in Asia and you're surrounded by Asians, right? When
Yeah.
we're growing up and this is for me, that's how I grew up. I grew up in the Bay Area, but I grew up in the East Bay Area where
Mm.
like most of the community was white or Hispanic. And I was like maybe in school, I was like one of maybe two Asians.
Mhm.
3 Asians. And so then there comes like this pressure of like, how are you representing Asians? How are
Right.
you representing your community?
Yeah.
And sometimes then there is that pressure of like, then yeah, we have to achieve, we have to make it, right? And
Yeah.
we have to be that model minority
Right.
that is achieving or that is succeeding and stable and secure.
Or you can go the other way around. You're like, I'm not Asian. And then you just try to be as much westernized as possible so that you don't need to face all these pressure and become, the representative of the community. And another thing I find that's very interesting is that this is what I noticed about myself as well. And I think that I've noticed that about a lot of my Asian American, ABC and Canadian born Chinese friends in Asia, where like there is a huge contrast when they like for example, if they were born and raised in North America and they're a minority, they come to Asia and all of a sudden they're the majority. I'm a weird case, right? Because I was, born and raised in China, but I need to really fit in Canada. I was such a minority, and everywhere I went, I was the only Asian, only girl in anything I did. So I gotta westernize myself so much, where it was pure survival, right? And soon as I landed in Singapore, I was like, I don't need to be that person anymore. Like what? Like I don't need to, like, I can speak Chinese. Like what? And then it's like, it's almost like a whiplash, right? You don't need to perform anymore, but in the
Mhm.
meantime, you have all these PTSD from performing.
Yeah.
I saw in a lot of my ABC friends where they arrive in Singapore, it's almost like, oh, this is my second chance to live, right? And like, let me be, and then we also have this like, Western side of them, and this Asian side of them, and it's like depends on which situation they're in, they can play different cards. So like, it's very interesting to see how the same person, their identity can shift in different cultural contexts.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely had a moment where I went to Chinese school on Saturday mornings. And I went from like this being one of two Asians in my school to, oh, everyone here is Chinese. And
Yeah.
it was like a shock. Like it was like, whoa, I am not the only person that looks like me. I am not representing all of Asians for people that have like never had any experiences with Asians. And I didn't have to like perform a certain way. And I was just like one of many. I was like, oh, like it's shocking. And it was shocking. And it felt like a little whiplash. But I think at the end of the day, felt really nice to not be one of two or three. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And until you meet a bunch of people where they all speak very good Chinese and they're referring to the food that you've never tasted, and you're like, I'm not that Asian. So that's when the
Yeah.
reverse happened, right?
It's so conflicting. And that's why I say the Asian American experience is very different because of
Yeah,
that feeling right there of like not really also fully belonging or not really fully feeling like I'm maybe as Asian as someone that grew up in Asia. It is different. Like the
yeah,
cultures I think is different. And you
yeah,
mentioned like kind of you mentioned in that when you go from like one to the other, it can feel like we don't have to perform a certain way, or oh, we can like flip, like we can like switch like from American to like maybe more Asian, right? Or more
yeah,
Western to Eastern. And I find that like a lot of people in college, when we go to school, and it almost feels like, oh, like now I can kind of play into this card a little bit more, or I can get to know, I think for a lot of people that grow up maybe in not a big like Asian setting, when they get to college or university, there's more opportunities to meet other Asians. And that's where it feels like, oh, maybe we can start over a little bit, or I can get to know my roots a little bit or my culture a
right.
little bit and play into that card a little bit more.
Right. It's all very interesting. This whole thing really teaches me a lot about humanity, because I also see, like for example, in Singapore, it's like you do see some of the ABCs, they want to play the Western card because it is perceived to be better and it attracts maybe girls easier. There's like this cachet around speaking like American English, and so versus if you're Chinese, people they put you in a different category, right? So and for example, every time I'm in Hong Kong, I don't want to speak Mandarin because they will give me different attitude. if I were to speak English versus if I were to speak Mandarin. So you almost become a chameleon, right? Like depends on where you go. And I see this a lot in international students who they went to international school, right? So
Mm,
like they went to like a Shanghai international school or like Taipei international school. They speak perfect American English, but then in the meantime, they grew up in China, in Asia. And they will go to the US to study for college, and they're still not Asian American. It's just like there's so many different branches of that, right? There's people who born and raised second generation, first generation, second generation, like my husband who's like the fourth generation. And there's people who maybe they moved there when they're 3 years old, 10 years old, 18 years old. Like everybody is different. And it's just insane to see that much diversity, even in the same community.
yeah. And I think that says a lot to just how like intricate or like nuanced culture can be, right? And like how our environment and like maybe even the environment or like our household that we grew up in, how different it can be and how that can affect like our own culture too.
Definitely, definitely. We are definitely way over time. So the last question is, what has this work taught you about yourself over the years?
I think it kind of goes back to how I didn't really grow up with a lot of like Asian friends, if at all. And I think that for me, I very much went through like the typical Asian American experience where you assimilate so that you can survive and so that you're not picked on and you're not othered. And and that's why like even going to Chinese school on a Saturday morning was like kind of shocking for me culturally. And it was something that I had to get used to. And that like feeling of maybe not being Asian enough or not being like American enough. I think as I've gotten older and in my work within like the Asian community and in Asian mental health, it's really taught me that like my culture, even if it might be a little different and it might be like a little mix, it's its own little
Mm-hmm.
thing of mixed of like Western and Eastern culture, but that culture is so important to me. I think it's really
Yeah.
taught me that like I feel like I have been able to use my skills in like communication and like my confidence in a way to be able to speak up and to represent Asians in mental health is so important to me and the work that I do. And I think
Yeah.
that over the years, the more experiences I've gotten and the longer that I've been in this career, I think I've really realized like that community and like representing and normalizing Asian mental health is at like one of my core values for the work that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Yeah.
even in some ways I've had to kind of relearn my culture or like kind of explore it a little bit more and think about like what's important for me and how I want to practice my culture, and how I want to reconnect with my culture. That I think has been one of the like the most important things for me and like what's made me want to keep doing the work that I'm doing.
Right. And I think that's almost as it's as hitting to your clients as it is hitting to you, the kind of work that you're doing, because you go deeper into yourself and then you can also contribute more to them. And then the more you do that, it's a virtuous cycle, right?
Yeah, I think it's like really interesting being a therapist because you do have to do the work like in yourself first. Like I have to like figure out my own stuff before I can like help other people or support other people, right? And so I really had to like look at myself and look at even the patterns that I have and maybe even the lessons that I've learned from me and in our Asian community and think
Mm-hmm.
about how that's affected me and think about, okay, now that I have this knowledge, like what do I want to do with it? And what's the messaging that I want to put out for our community or for the community in general about what it means being Asian or Asian American or what it means or why it's important to address like Asian mental health in general.
Yeah, for sure. This is the question I ask every single person on the show. Can you finish the sentence? I am proud of myself because
I like this because I ask my clients this question.
ask yourself that question.
Yeah. I am proud of myself for getting over my own like perfectionism and my own judgment and expectations. Therapists are human too, so I think it's fair to say that we all have our own stuff that we're going through and we're learning about
Yeah.
ourselves. I'm most proud of myself for like getting over my tendency to want to do things perfectly. And because I think that caused a lot of fear in like how I was putting myself out there, even on like social media, or like how I was connecting with people in the community. And I think if I didn't get over that fear, I don't think I would be on this podcast today, right? Or I don't think I would be working out in the community and meeting all the people that I've met today. And so I'm most proud of myself for like working through that fear and that self-judgment and that pressure that I put on myself so that I can really do the work that I really like doing.
For sure. Yeah. So I'm not a perfectionist.
Mhm.
And I used to think that was a bad thing, right? Because you work in, professional services, and I remember even when I was 13 years old, my junior high English teacher, she was like, "Crystal, you're smart, but you're careless."
Mhm.
So it's like, to me, I was like, oh shit, now I don't have a future. But
Mhm.
I mean, over the years, and now I get to know, like, wow, this is actually a good thing sometimes to not be a perfectionist, because you are a lot more free spirited and you just like do stuff, right? Because oftentimes it is about to get, about getting stuff down than being, 150% correct before you do it. And there is a lot of freedom that comes out of just to get it down and not focusing on the analysis.
Yeah. Yeah, I've learned even something that I heard the other day is that like, to be able to do anything, you have to just try it, right? And I tell my
Yeah.
clients that all the time. We just have to try it, right? And like we just have to, yeah, we be proud of ourselves for even like the smaller steps that we take.
Yeah.
But sometimes like yeah, that perfectionism and that want to like just get it right and get it right and do it good on the first try, sometimes that can hold us back from a lot of even just taking that first step.
The first step, yeah. So how can people find you?
So people can find me. I'm on Instagram at Land Family Therapy, or you can find me at my website, landfamilytherapy.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you so much for being on the show. And I know that we're way over time. It's like 2 hour conversation. But yeah, thank you so much for the amazing talk that we have today. If this conversation sparked something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are building a more true life, not just more impressive, we would love to hear your story. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Asian Rebel Club, and join our newsletter for more ways to connect. Link in the description. Until next time.